yes, it's the best year for us, the consumers. But when you're the people working on this stuff, and especially if you're the people releasing this stuff, you are fighting to survive in a year like this.
Welcome to our in-game chat segment, guys, where we're going to talk about why are we seeing so many layoffs in the gaming industry. This is why we have Tony on the show, because I feel like you can really contribute to this conversation just because you are so attuned with the industry. 2023 has been an amazing year for games. Absolutely just breaking records, sales. Why is this happening? Why are we seeing these layoffs when the games are clearly doing well for the most part?
So here's the thing. Earlier we mentioned like for Bungie, we're down by like 45% of what we expected. And that isn't necessarily on the fault of Bungie. We're in probably the best year of gaming ever. I looked it up. Lightfall came out on in February this year. And that's also about the time that Hogwarts Legacy came out, Jedi Survivor shortly after that. So, and people were maybe coming off a Hi-Fi Rush a little bit, but they probably got through that. But, 2023. I think Resident Evil 4 also was very early March or late March. I can't remember. But anyways, the point is, a lot of people are saying this is the best year in gaming. And that's because of how many big titles that we've had. We have a new Diablo game. We have a new Final Fantasy. We have Bethesda's next big RPG, and so on and so forth. So many things came out this year. And because of that, yes, it's the best year for us, the consumers. But when you're the people working on this stuff, and especially if you're the people releasing this stuff, you are fighting to survive in a year like this. And there you have to do things that even like we also talked about Remedy this show. Remedy originally had Alan Wake 2 coming out like right next to Mario Wonder and Spider-Man 2. They were like, hell no.
Yeah.
They pushed that game back a week to make sure that did not happen. I think Assassin's Creed Mirage did something similar. I can't remember what it was going to release around, but they pushed that away too, or they pushed it early. I think actually, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Because they knew like that's a terrible idea. We can't do that. But this goes way far back to, I could think of many other examples, like a way back in the day. Prime example is Titanfall 2. Titanfall 2 was a game that people loved when they played it. The campaign was awesome, and I can vouch that's like one of the best first-person shooter campaigns I've ever played. But because they released that game sandwiched in between, I think it was Gears of War 4 and Battlefield 1, EA's very own game. It's moments like that it's like, even though we, the consumers, are loving it this year, when there's so many games being released back-to-back like this, it's hard as a publisher to make those sales that like Square Enix is like, yeah, Final Fantasy 16 didn't make the money we wanted. It still did good, but it just didn't make what we wanted or whatever expected. And that's because that was releasing in a month that Street Fighter 6 and Diablo 4 came out. It's hard. And not to mention that we're in a very terrible time in terms of economic stuff on top of that.
Yep.
And people just aren't spending as much. And when people are not spending as much and they're having to compete with each other, something's got to go to maintain. Something's got to go. And unfortunately, that's like, what? I think it's now over 6,000 jobs that have been laid off this year in the game industry.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Yeah. But I do have a question for you guys. We see some of these companies. We have Embracer Group, we have Unity, we have Epic Games, Microsoft, Media Molecule, and Naughty Dog, right? They all have laid off people this year. Those are just some of the companies. We look at a company like Nintendo. No layoffs.
Yeah. So, not even just that. Wasn't there a statement that like a higher up said something like, yeah, we take out of our own salary before we fire anybody?
I
thought I saw something like that, which was, I'm like, maybe bullshit, but damn.
So here's my thing too, is you look at Nintendo and the developers they have under them, right? I think one. I think it's like one or a very few couple different developers on them. You look at Sony, you look at Xbox, and there's a lot of cooks in that kitchen, right? There's just a ton of different stuff. So does that correlate to what's happening here? Because since Microsoft is kind of like its own little bubble in a sense, where they're not looking to acquire all these different companies and stuff like that. They're kind of want to, if anything, they almost got acquired by Microsoft. Well, not almost, but you know what I mean. It was entertained, but
Right.
so how do you feel about that? How they're able to just never have to lay off employees? Is it just a culture thing for them? Is it just, I'm curious.
The gaming industry was probably one of the only entertainments to like really still be active during COVID, right? And that was like the primary thing that everyone was doing. So a lot of investors were just kind of like going at it and just like, hey, we're just gonna, invest in these properties, overinflate our studios and hire these many people. And then now coming into it, bombarding 2023 with all these games, it's really hard to stand out, right? You can have Street Fighter 6 and Armored Core 6 or something, right? And those are phenomenal games, but like you add that to the mix of everything else
There's
that was
only
released.
so much some dollars going to stretch to who's going to be able to buy what, right? Because like
Yes,
I don't really know that many people that were able to buy every single AAA title that came out this
right.
year.
And so I think that has a lot to do with it. And also this is the thing though. It's like then on the flip side, this has been a year of games, man. This has been a year of a 69 billion acquisition from Microsoft, 40 million sales from PS5, like from Sony, right? You can tell that the gaming industry is thriving in that aspect of like people are spending money in this industry, right? So how is it that we're not giving that to the employees? How is it that these companies like Epic, for example, are conglomerates, are just making like huge amounts of money, but then they lay off over what was it, like 8,000 employees or 800 employees or something like that? The CEOs and the big companies, and this can be totally wrong, but they may be making all the money and they're not really distributing it to their staff. You see that. I don't know if it's true, but then the way this is looking, the way the gaming industry is looking right now with all these layoffs, that's what I see. That's kind of like what I think about. It's like, damn, like how is Epic making all this money and how is Embracer Group spending all this money and then laying off so many people? Like, how does that make sense? Like, make it make sense. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the reality is. But from my lens, I see that there's a lot of companies that are spending so much money, making so much money, but then the people that are actually making these games, they're not getting the benefits. They're not reaping the benefits.
Yeah, I just it's hard because you can't just blame it on the CEO that like, oh, they're making too much money. That's not the full picture, right? There's a bunch of little things that go into. They could have said, okay, we're going to spend this much money on this thing. If we don't make the money back, then we got to cut somewhere, right? We got to do
Right.
something. So that's part of it too. So the math ain't mathin', right? When it comes to
Right.
that part, because they already account for the CEO's compensation and stuff like that, right? Um, I do think that like you say these groups, Embracer Group, Unity, Epic Games, Naughty Dog's a weird one. But again, they never were never able to get all factions off of the ground, right? So that's probably a lot of the layoffs there, right? They just can't do it.
But
Yeah,
this is my thing. It's like,
what?
again, I'm not trying to like aim at the CEOs or the big companies, but it's like you in my opinion, I'm not a businessman whatsoever, right? But you should have a plan in place of like, okay, we're gonna launch this game, and we have to have a plan A and a plan B. A plan A of like if this does really well, or a plan B if this like does horribly bad. Like I know that's usually what the go-to answer is like, oh, we've lost money, we have to recoup that money, we have to lay off people. Like
Well, what's the most expensive cost for
mm,
any industry? People,
Employees.
yep,
employees. They
Yeah.
cost a lot of money.
benefits. Yep.
Especially if you give
Everything.
them benefits. Yep.
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 Which is
And
why that was a way that like Microsoft people were complaining about Xbox where they have contractors left and right to
Yep.
avoid that.
yeah.
And it's like, but we want you to have permanent employees, but they probably
They're
do the
like, well,
contractor
you
thing
can't.
because like Kel said, maybe it's like that's how they avoid firing people is because they
Right.
just
Hmm.
well, let's just get contractors instead kind of a thing.
Yep.
Uh,
And I imagine you're going to see a lot of those pop up. A lot of those, even like me, when I've been searching, right? I've seen that there's a lot more contracting positions opening versus full time. It's full time employees expensive for the company, really, really expensive. So
I think this is just a really great conversation, first off, because there's no right or wrong answer. We don't know the
Yeah.
answers to this, right? But I think it's fun and interesting to speculate what really is the issue lying behind all these layoffs, because there's something wrong in the gaming industry. If this is like a continuous thing that people are getting laid off left and right, there has to be something wrong that we're not seeing in a different lens, you know?
well,
I have a thing.
okay.
Games have become more and more expensive to make now.
I love that you're
Mm-hmm.
going this direction. Go for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I just thought of because back in the day, and I just read this book. It's a not just read, but a couple months I read this book. Great book, by the way. Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, by
Yes. Yeah.
Jason Schreier,
Yep.
and in that book, you get to learn the development of all these games and what the developers and publishers kind of had to go through to make it, and and uh, and in all these stories, all the games in this book, they pretty much were in that usual like 2 to 3 year life cycle that we used to have in the PS3 and 360 era. And I think that's a dev cycle that Nintendo might still be on because they're not necessarily doing the super duper high graphic, massive open
Mm-mm.
world side questy shenanigans or whatever that all these other games do that now take, and a lot of people are saying this on the record, 4 to 6 years now.
Mm-hmm.
It's double the amount of time that it used to be, which means double the budget,
Mm-hmm.
which would hopefully mean you're making more than double the sales
Right.
too. But it's like when you are funding a team for no longer what was the 2 to 3 year life cycle, but you're funding that team's development for 4 to 6 years, you are also only producing 2 games every decade instead
Right.
of like three
Right.
you know?
100%.
So it's like that's a big I just kind of went down that rabbit trail, and that's kind of a big deal. If you're going to keep trying to make these games that take that long to make and funding those teams to do that, then it's a big difference though in today's world, whether the economy or not, like that's a big change that
The big
you know.
question is that the answer? Should we have smaller scale games? Because back to
Yes.
what I was talking about
Yeah.
Yes.
before,
Yes. 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 Please, let's go
I
back to this.
was I was mentioning Uncharted Lost Legacy. That's the game I was trying to say. That's a very
Yeah.
nice kind of condensed game of a bigger title, right? That was, obviously a widely successful, but they condensed it into a smaller package and still having that AAA budget behind it, right? Same thing with Miles Morales. Same thing with I kind of put Assassin's Creed Mirage in that category too. Like they're much more smaller scale and you still get that like high quality value to it. I think that is where we should be heading towards instead of the opposite where this year, last year, the year before it's been people like I feel like ever since Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain came out, right? 2015 or something, where it just like, open world, you do whatever you want, extra 30 hours on tacked onto the game. Everyone started kind of going on that trend of like open worlds. That's where everything's at. Everyone loves open worlds. Let's keep doing that. Let's keep doing that. Obviously, Assassin's Creed kind of sparked that as well. At some point now, like we're just like at least me, I am burnt out when it comes to open world games, and it's like, why do I need that 70+ hour game to and like have like no, I don't want that anymore. I
Yeah.
want a smaller title. Miles Morales was perfect. Even Spider-Man 2, man, that was perfect. Like you were saying, KBG, like
Yeah.
that is such a
Which
nice
Spider-Man
way
2
to
sold
consume.
2.5 million, and it's
Hmm.
like first day.
Yeah, yeah,
So there you
I'm
go.
and
I'm
so
going to play devil's advocate here. I'm going to play
Yeah.
the
Yep.
other the other consumer part. Well, I don't want my games to be 20-25 hours long. I want my games I want to spend my $70 and I want as much
Yes.
content as possible. Bring in the Baldur's Gates, bring in the Elden Rings, right? So that's the other side of the coin, right? Like if you
right.
look at it, your $70 for Baldur's Gate 3 is go stretching so far. There's so much content in that game. You could spend 500 hours in that game easy, right? And when it
Yeah.
comes to you look at a game like Spider-Man or like you said Miles Morales, you're spending 20 hours. That gamer to them is like no. Like you look at people that play MMOs as well, right? They spend 20 what I don't know the subscription $15-20 a month, but they have endless content right? So for them, that $70 is not worth it to them, and that's why they won't buy the
Yeah.
game, because like it's not enough content for me. So
Mhm.
I think there's two types of gamers. I want to say people lean more towards what the way we're thinking, where we like the more linear experiences, more like handpicked, that kind of stuff. I personally like that better too, but I also see the other side where like I
Totally, yeah.
won't. Yeah.
Can I point
I
out
get that.
like two studios that and I totally get Rob's point too, because like, and I sometimes appreciate indie games and they're like $20, but they're really just for like 5 hours of entertainment or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, exactly.
But like but there's two teams in terms of like being owned by a big company that are doing really good stuff, which is Obsidian Entertainment over on Xbox and Insomniac Games over at PlayStation. Those are two studios that are like, they're producing a game of some kind somehow every couple years.
Mhm.
They're
Mhm.
just doing it, and I don't know how, but when I look at Insomniac, granted, they kind of have various scale projects and shrink them, and they have
Right.
like a bunch of different teams doing stuff there. But these are projects that aren't massive. Outer Worlds wasn't that big of a game.
Mhm.
Grounded was pretty small team, and they eventually made it full. And Pentiment was a super tiny one. And Avowed is not. It's kind of like a modest sized team too. But like they're they're making games
Pentiment,
that don't look
Pentiment.
like like, yeah, Pentiment, sorry, yeah. But Insomniac, I think, is kind of, I think, the great area, like the great spot that we want a lot of studios to maybe be, because if you look at them, 2018, that team made Spider-Man 2, or Spider-Man, sorry. I think the Ratchet and Clank, there was like a Ratchet and Clank remake that was like 2016. Does that sound right?
That
Yeah.
sounds right.
PS4,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was 2016, and Spider-Man 2018. That's when PlayStation, they bought Insomniac after
Right.
Spider-Man. And after they bought them, 2 years later, Miles Morales. 3 years, or sorry, 2 years later, Miles Morales. A year after that, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. 2 years after that, Spider-Man 2. We'll probably have Wolverine in the next 2 years, and so on and so forth. And somehow they just keep producing these games, and it's probably because, like we said, they are a modest size. None of those games that I listed will take you more than 30 hours to complete, probably, you know? And and two of those games were open world. So just not
Yeah.
massive open world,
Right,
but they were
right.
open world. So I think like I think that is the problem, is like if something is massive and you make a game with 1,000 planets or a massive world or whatever, and make a bunch of filler side quests, and that fills the time, that is probably catering to the thing that Rob said, which is sometimes people want content in their game to last that $70. But I don't know. I don't know if that's a
I
solution. It's like Kel said. I don't know if we're not like the people that are the owners of these companies, but it's like, is that a strategy that works? Insomniac and Obsidian, that they might be proving that. I don't know.
And then also too, everyone is doing subscriptions now, right? And again,
Mhm.
with the same with games, this is people can only afford so many subscriptions until they have to pick and
it's
choose
too
who they
much.
want,
Yeah.
right? It's too much. It's just too
Yeah.
much to go. Before there was like a few subscriptions you had to choose from. You had your Amazon, you had your Netflix, and that was pretty much it. Now you have Hulu and
Everything under the
everything,
sun.
everything, literally everything. Even your tools that you use, your Photoshops and all that stuff, Adobe.
So I have a question for you guys, and I don't obviously know the answer to this. You might not know either, but an acquisition, right? Like Sony acquired Bungie in some aspects, right? What is the point of an acquisition if it's not to have the funds of the company that
Right.
purchased you, right? I don't understand how Bungie is making the decision of laying off these people when the whole purpose, I thought, was okay. I mean, and Bungie is maybe a little bit different, but like I'm thinking like a smaller indie company that is acquired by a bigger company, right? They are kind of relying on the funds of that big company. And so that I think, in my opinion, they would be more helped or more, safe in that sense of like, all right, well, we know we're not going to get laid off because we are under this big umbrella. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Mm,
And so acquisitions is a good point, because that's what you would think. Like if Double Fine's a good example, where Tim Schafer there, he literally said like, the main reason we were okay getting acquired by Microsoft is because we were just tired of looking for money. Like we were
Yeah.
tired of doing that all the
yeah.
time, doing the Kickstarters and everything. We just
Right.
we just want to create, and that's it. um which it's like, that's what Kel's saying. It's like, isn't that the point if you get acquired, just to be able to make, what you want to make? Um, but a lot of the times there's more behind that, where depending on who you're acquired by, they might want you to make specific things to make certain profits or whatever,
Sure,
blah, blah,
sure.
blah. To Kel's example, like, maybe, again, because we don't know what decisions have to be made when you're higher up like that, maybe being, owned by Sony, let's just say,
Hmm.
he as or them or whoever the top people at Bungie, they have to make Sony happy,
Hmm.
and by and one of those things is showing how much profit that they are making
Right.
as this studio,
Right.
but and a big thing that chews into profit, I run a business, and like, you got to keep track of your expenses. and
Hmm. Hmm.
and as Rob said earlier, employees are the biggest expense that you have. So, and if they want to keep the higher ups at Sony happy, that's probably how they made that decision. It's like, okay, how do we make our profits higher? Because,
Exactly. And they bought them for a
yeah,
reason, right? They spent a lot of money to acquire them. They want their return on investment as quickly as possible because that's just the way it is. So they're seeing that you're not performing for me. Like, it's
mhm,
almost harder when you get acquired because you have to appease your overlords in the sense that
yeah,
Hmm.
that acquired you, right? So it's if you're just by yourself or you're bootstrap or whatever, it's just like the only person that you're just going to disappoint is your own company, right? You're just like, we just didn't hit the record profits, and founders are all sad and stuff like that. But when you are acquired, there's a lot of times where there's like a lot of companies don't want to get acquired because
yeah,
of that exact. You have to abide by what Tony was saying, abide by their rules, and you have
Right.
to do
Right.
things their way, and that might be not what your company stood for in the beginning, right? So there's a lot of moving parts to it. It's not easy. Business is, like I said, I hate to say this, but business is business at the end of the day, and uh,
business is business.
been in business, and then I just sucks for them. It just sucks, but for the employees. But I think they know that too, like going into it, as far as working in the gaming industry, turnover happens all the time, right? It's like showbiz in a sense. It's just, if this X doesn't perform, if you're an actor and your movie does like shit, right? You're probably more than likely not be able to find a job easier. But if your movie blows up and you do really well, then you're going to be
Yeah,
getting offers this, there, and there, right? So
yeah,
it all depends on performance, and it's just like any other business in the world.
like the Lies of P studio.
Like the Liza PP studio, yeah,
Like
exactly.
Liza Peepee. Yep.
PP
Yeah,
Well,
studio.
fascinating. Like I again, I love this type of conversation because there's so many like views on
It's
this, and it's just
it's
such
just
a
crazy this much happened this year,
this
hmm
though.
year, man.
Like,
This
that's the
year, yeah.
thing. Like, that's why it's an interesting topic, because like it's the best year for us, but it's like the worst year for them, and it's just like, how the hell did that happen? Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So,
yeah,
but
but
that's what we talked about. Yeah.